It's time for the Moving Pick Podcast, the official podcast of that NBALotteryPick.com. Now here's your hosts, Ben Chu and Ray Moralde.
And welcome in, everyone, to the third episode of the Moving Pick Podcast. I am Ben Chu, and alongside me, as always, is Ray Moralde. Ray, how you doing?
Well, I just saw my life flash before my eyes because yesterday we were watching Brandon Knight go through everything in that Nets-Bucks triple overtime game where he missed basically a gimme layup, and then he makes a three-pointer to send the game to a third overtime. So I think that's what happened. But nevertheless, it's like, wow, so that's how life is.
I remember I read something on Twitter about, there are, he could have written a movie script with that ending. Basically. Specifically. He could have. And yeah. I will say, though, before we hit to some of our regular topics, how about those Bucks now? Above 500, I think, for the first time since they made the playoffs under the Brandon Jennings era. What do you think with this team right now from Milwaukee?
I'm a little surprised, actually, but Jason Kidd's got them playing some defense, and I think for some people, begrudgingly, Jason Kidd's actually a pretty damn good coach.
I think so, too, especially, too, and you probably heard the story, too, that with going into the final seconds of the second overtime, apparently Kidd yelled to Joe Johnson that, hey, the ball's going to this guy. Mm-hmm. And essentially, and you have to give credit where credit is due, Giannis on that second overtime on that shot played fantastic defense. Mm-hmm. I don't think you could have done better. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I've always thought that the Bucks were that team on the rise that they could get the right pieces together, and that's what they're doing right now, and I think they're a very good team in the East now.
It also helps that Larry Sanders, which we kind of forgot about last season because he was pretty much out for most of that season, he came back and solidified that defense for the Bucks. Even though they're all young guys, they have that defensive presence inside that can help them out. So
right, and I think one thing that I wanted to note too, specifically with their team, the way that they're spreading the floor is so much better than it was last year. Mm-hmm. And I think the major point that this team's going to have to make is that they are much younger than most of the teams in the Eastern Conference, just based on age alone. I think outside of the 76ers, they're the second youngest team in the East. Mm-hmm. So if they can use that youth movement, I'm trying to think of a better example. Very similar to when T-Mac was in his Orlando era. That team was pretty young around him. And if you can use youth to your advantage. And I think at some point, that is a team that could be incredibly tough in the East.
And as much as we made fun of Brandon Knight at the beginning of this podcast, he's actually playing really well this season.
Right, I think so. I mean, and there's an argument out there for even Piston fans, they might have preferred to keep Brandon Knight over Brandon Jennings, but
Jennings has been so wild this season.
Yeah, he has been.
He has been really his entire career.
Yeah, it's just been a weird year, especially in Detroit. But let us move to the number one team in the East, the Toronto Raptors. They pulled
This is weird.
I know it doesn't make sense to me either. They pulled out a big win on a Wednesday night over the Memphis Grizzlies.
Yeah.
Overall, I don't think it's really too shocking considering how the Memphis Grizzlies play their style of offense and how it works. But do you think Toronto is the number one team in the East and should be the favorites outside of Cleveland to make it to the Eastern Conference Finals?
There's still the Bulls, obviously. There's still the Wizards. They just got Bradley Beal back. But what I do notice is that they got some. Now they're looking like underrated acquisitions. James Johnson's playing really well for the Raptors, who had a renaissance year with the Grizzlies, ironically, last year. And Lou Williams, who was pretty much forgotten because he had an injury the year before that. He was toiling in Atlanta, I believe, right? Mm-hmm. And then he went to Toronto as the Super Six man, the Jamal Crawford type for that team. That gave them more offense. They are now in the top 5 in offensive efficiency. They were 13th, I believe, last season. And their defense is still really good. They're both top 10 in offense and defense. And they're taking care of the ball. They're first in turnover ratio, and I believe second in least turnovers overall. So they are doing everything right on offense right now, and they hope they can keep this up.
I mean, I think overall, especially in my opinion, Toronto has been that sleeper team in the last couple of seasons, and I think they're finally hitting their stride. I've said this off air to you and I've said it to other people. I think you can make an argument right now that Kyle Lowry is the best point guard in the NBA. Just the way that he has that team moving and the way that, especially in those final seconds when Toronto needed a bucket to put them up 4, easy. Just, it looked like a day at the office.
Yeah, and we're still waiting for Jonas Valanciunas to make that one more leap, basically, to be basically an all-star center for that team. Again, Lou Williams, James Johnson helps the bench. Their bench is deep right now. They have Patterson, they have Vasquez also. It's a really good 1 to 10 team right now.
And I think overall, too, you also have to definitely talk about that home court advantage they have now in Toronto. Like especially during the Vince Carter era, that place was loud. The Air Canada Centre was the place to be, especially in Toronto, in that area.
Yeah, they were rocking in the playoffs last season. It's like, wow, I never knew they were this loud, because when we watch League Pass, it's like, it seems so subdued. But I guess they turn up another level when the playoffs get there.
Overall, do you think, especially with this roster, that they need to make any moves?
I mean, at this point, they're just going to grow within. That's my view. I mean, I feel like they could use another backup big man, I guess. But other than that, like, the team is fine as is. Will it win a championship? I don't know. Not with this crop, I don't think. But I think they can grow within.
I still think they can, especially with how the East is right now. Like, you can make the argument that Cleveland has the most talent, and again, they have 3 of the best superstars in the NBA today. But they're having their own problems. Chicago is good, but we know the story with Chicago. It goes between what Derrick Rose can do and can that team offensively come together. And I still think they can. They're still a couple of spots away, in my opinion. They just need to show the consistency. And let's be honest, if Derrick Rose is not where he is health-wise, that team's going to be a team I think could be one and done in the playoffs.
But the funny thing is that they've done better offensively without Derrick Rose.
Right, and that makes no sense in my opinion too. It doesn't, but it just on translate. And again, we have to also note that they did beat Toronto, went on the road relatively well. But when I watched that game, it seemed more like Chicago played up to their potential and played a great game, more than Toronto lost that game. Like, there were stretches in that third quarter where Toronto offensively just wasn't moving the ball well enough.
Yeah, they have Pau Gasol, and Jimmy Butler is playing out of his mind right now.
Right. And I still think that they have to overachieve almost, I think, to make the playoffs. And to not make the playoffs, but to make it to the Eastern Conference Finals, which seems odd.
You really think so?
I think they need to overachieve, honestly, yeah. Because I think they have a really good team, but offensively, when it comes to the playoffs, let's say they could slip to the 3rd or 4th seed overall, they might get beat by a team. Again, it's so early that we don't know what the seedings are going to be. But let's say they face Milwaukee in the second round. I would favor Chicago, but it wouldn't shock me to see Milwaukee win that series.
Yeah, I think it's still early because Milwaukee's playing well right now too, but I don't expect them to make the playoffs.
No, I don't. I mean, I don't really think so either. But I think that also speaks to the logjam in the East. Like, outside of, let's assume, Cleveland, Washington, Toronto, and Chicago are all gimme in picks, and then you could throw in, you could argue Charlotte, just with what they have, and then you could, I'm trying to think in regards, like, you could, let's say,
Atlanta.
at worst, Atlanta's probably getting in, and then worst case, Milwaukee will sneak in at some point. But to be honest, out of those teams, maybe outside of Toronto, and you could make the argument for Chicago, the shift could be so drastic so quickly.
Yeah, just remember this. Like, once Cleveland gets it together, they're going to be frightening, and if they go off that 20-game winning streak or something like that. Right. Yeah, just don't be surprised. It's so early right now.
I honestly want one more thing before we take a break and head off to some other topics. Who is Toronto's X factor right now on this team?
Lou Williams, again off the bench. I think that was part of their weakness last season when they went to their bench and they couldn't get any scoring off of it. Now that they have Lou Williams and James Johnson off the bench, and then Grizzlies, Vasquez, and Patrick Patterson, that's a deep bench right now.
Yeah, it's a good bench. The guy I still think is Terrence Ross. If Ross can, because I would put Ross in that like lower level tier of NBA stars. If he can get up to where he is essentially, DeMar DeRozan's DeMar DeRozan's Tracy McGrady, that team is scary. That team could be what those 2000 Toronto Raptors would have been.
But he is shooting well right now.
Yeah, he is.
Is like shooting 43% from 3, making 91% of his free throws. So he gets it up to maybe 15 points a game. That team's going to be so scary.
They are going to be really scary. So we're going to take a quick break here on the Moving Pick Podcast, episode 3. We got to talk about Justin Timberlake. There was some Twitter trolling this week, and then you guys already know me and Ray love to talk about video games occasionally, and there was some real life Mario Karting going on in Japan. So we'll take another 20-second timeout, and we'll be right back on the third episode of the Moving Pick Podcast.
Don't be so quick to walk away. What's up, Internet? If you're a Los Angeles Clippers fan, you can check out the Full Sail Podcast, brought to you by the No Look Podcast Network at thenolookpass.com. It is a podcast with a smooth rock slant, which is naturally the kind of music one would expect to listen to on yachts and Clipper ships. Catch Brandon Tomioy and David Deep as they talk about everything Clipper-related once a month. Once again, it's the Full Sail Podcast, brought to you by the No Look Podcast Network. You can find the show at thenolookpass.com.
And we're back on the third episode of the Moving Pick Podcast. Ben, Chu, and Ray Moralde. Everyone knows who you are.
Kinda.
They kind of know who you are. So obviously, as you guys know, that we are the official podcast of that NBALotteryPick.com, which you guys probably heard from the intro. And one of the major things on the site this week was Justin Timberlake, who most would know is a co-owner of the Memphis Grizzlies. He owns some minority stake. I don't know what percentage, but there was apparently a Twitter troll, and I think Ray, I think you can tell the story better than I can.
So basically, like he was happy when the Grizzlies went, I believe 9-1, 10-1, whichever.
Right.
But they are winning a lot of games. And then a Twitter troll basically said bandwagon, not knowing that JT is actually a minority owner of the Memphis Grizzlies. So he went off on that fan and told him like, yeah, I'm a minority owner and I lived in Memphis. Next.
I mean, overall, especially with that situation for him, I think it's weird to think because me and you are so in tune with the league because we have to cover it on a daily basis that people don't realize that, and to see someone of JT's star potential call out someone essentially on Twitter for that thing, it doesn't happen often.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to go see like Steve Ballmer run his mouth on Twitter. I don't think that's going to happen. So it's a unique situation, but.
The thing is that we also knew that JT was seen in Laker games years back. And at the time, though, I mean, it's okay to be a fan of the Lakers or Kobe Bryant or whatever if, you're basically just a fan of basketball, you don't own a team or whatever. I mean, And when he did that, when someone called him out on that, it's like they said, oh, well, I'm a fan of Kobe too. That's okay. And it's perfectly fine. Right. And it was before he was the owner of Memphis Grizzlies. And even then, when the Grizzlies went to Memphis, there was an old picture of him back in his NSYNC days.
Way back then.
Yeah. I was like 19 or something. I thought it was. He was wearing a Grizzlies shirt.
Right.
So, in 2001. So... Yeah, he's been pretty loyal to Memphis, but it's also okay to be a fan of a player as well. I mean, if you're a fan of the league, it's okay to check out other teams.
Right. Here's my question though, and we've had discussions like this away from the podcast about in regards to celebrities, in regards to teams. And obviously there are certain people like obviously Jack with the Lakers, and like, is there a line that you're allowed to cross if you're a celebrity in regards to have multiple allegiances to different teams, or are the rules essentially the same sort of for the regular fandom?
I remember Jack Nicholson back when the Lakers were bad in the early 90s. I remember him jumping from court to court. Like he went to a Pistons game, he went to a Bulls game. Do you remember this?
I do, yes.
Yeah.
Early on in the 90s.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, they're just regular. I mean, regular people that happen to work in a very, very lucrative industry.
Right.
That's all I really see it as,
I just always find it weird, especially with fans, is that I always like to classify there are two types of NBA fans. There's the fan of the team that, they grew up with and blah, blah. And then there are the other fans who are such diehard fans that they live, breathe, and die with the organization. You're telling me. And I know, and I know that there's no rationalization sometimes. And I think, if we've learned anything from, at least hopefully in the future with this podcast, is that we want to not educate, but at least tell people, like, just calm down. Like, this is sports. This is, we're supposed to have fun overall, but, it's a game, the last time I checked.
People know that I'm a Lakers fan, but I also keep up with the entire league. It's my job, first of all. But even still, like, even when I wasn't working in basketball, I kind of looked at it as like, oh, well, this team is good, this team is bad. Lakers are bad, whatever, It won't control my life. If anything, after this podcast, I'm worried about what to eat instead of what's going on in this game. That's what I'm worried about. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think, and it's weird too, and I've always talked with people who aren't media members, who are just regular fans of the league.
Right.
And it's a complete 180. Because most people, I would assume, view the league as, it's enjoyment, it's a release for most people, because that's what they do. But people have to remember, this is a job for us. So we might kind of, yeah. And then people have to realize at times is that you can hit that level, and we all do at times, of being sick of something. And I'm not going to say I've ever been sick of watching NBA basketball, but there are times when your mind begins to wander. You
just want to do something else, But back to the subject at hand, It's basically like, we live and breathe basketball, but it's not going to consume us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense in my world, at least.
Like, let us live, basically. Let JT live.
Let JT be
by the way, we are based in Portland, Oregon. It's Thursday night while we're recording this podcast.
Yeah, everyone else will be listening to this tomorrow.
But Justin Timberlake is actually here.
Yes, he is.
Actually here performing in a concert.
I know. I love the irony of how that works out. You know what I mean? It just all sort of fit together. And I know, you recently on the No Look Past podcast Chronicles of Karate, you had Kristen Lello, who again is an unabashed Justin Timberlake fan.
Yeah, that reminds me of the time when Kristen Lello met Justin Timberlake. but seriously, like, it's funny because I just moved here last month, and I really had no idea JT was going to be here until a few days ago.
Right.
I really didn't.
It's weird how stuff travels in locations sometimes.
Yeah.
And I mean, okay, very, 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 before we move on to the next final segment of the night, favorite Justin Timberlake song or favorite NSYNC song?
Oh, favorite NSYNC song.
Yeah, you have to go either, because I know there are people who love
favorite
singular.
NSYNC song would be "Tearing Up My Heart."
Okay.
But I do love, because I know the routines to some dances. I can't even believe I'm admitting this, but because I actually helped out some friends to a routine on, I think it's Gonna Be Me.
Oh, man.
I knew the routine to that.
It's Gonna Be Me is a quality NSYNC song. I don't think anyone's going to debate you on that.
Yeah, but Tearing Up My Heart gets me going.
Right, it gets you going.
As far as JT, I'll go with My Love with T.I.
Okay, that's a good song. I mean, for me, I think it's an instant classic. Everyone knows it's Bye 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 for NSYNC. And then for JT, it's tough because there's a lot of quality songs, but for some reason, I've always just been impartial to Senorita. I thought Senorita was a very good song.
It's a great song, yeah. Everyone in the podcast that I do for the No Look Pass, they all answer Cry Me a River.
Everyone does. And
yeah.
I don't know why, honestly.
Maybe it's the whole, controversy thing with, Britney Spears and everything.
Right.
And that still makes me sad, even, 14 years later.
14 years later.
Something like that.
Oh, my God. You see, this is the positive of the Movie Pick podcast, is that you never know what you're going to hear. You never know. It's like with some podcasts, you know what you're going to hear. With us, we don't know. So.
I'm still sad. Go on.
As if you couldn't tell, since there's no video currently, Ray is a little emotional about this. But let us move on to the more interesting random story of the podcast, where apparently some cosplayers, I know you're a little bit more in tune with that than I am. It is cosplayers.
Are you making fun of me? No, I'm kidding.
No, I'm not making fun of you. I'm making sure I pronounced this correctly. Apparently, some cosplayers in Japan, I think it was last weekend, and apparently they do this every month. They create their own version of real life Mario Kart, where they drive through some of the city streets of Tokyo and essentially create Mario Kart in real life.
So do they actually fire out banana peels, or?
I wondered that. I was looking at multiple articles on it. There wasn't anything really truly specific, but apparently they have items, and they could use items. Again, I don't know what. I highly doubt they're throwing out banana peels onto the streets of Tokyo.
I'm just always so amazed by the details of how they go, what they go through, their costumes and everything.
Right.
I have friends. I used to be in the anime community. Hello, nerds. But I'm always amazed by my friends who go through lengths to fix their costumes, from their facial features to the details and everything. It's pretty incredible, actually, and they do this just for to show how good they are for a few hours, and then they change out, and it's wow, all that time just for that. I mean, it's amazing.
I know, look, the community. has grown because again, if we're talking about this in early 2000, that's the change of the waves of society hasn't hit that situation yet. It was still like, I'm not going to say you were like an outcast, but I was thinking more along the lines that it's not the norm, and now it's cool to go to Comic-Con.
It's more accepted now.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Much more.
Like a lot of my friends who used to be ashamed of being anime/cosplay fans, it's like now they're coming out of the woodwork. It's like, oh yay, I'm a proud cosplayer, woo!
Right. And I mean, to bring it back to the NBA, we know Robin and Brooke Lopez are huge comic book fans, and obviously Tim Duncan with the Punisher car.
Ronnie Turoff actually is also a big Comic-Con fan. And big anime fan as well. I remember talking to him on Twitter about that, and he was so proud he was naming off all these series. I'm just like, wow, it's amazing.
This is what we like to say. We're saying every day. I did not know that about Ronnie Turoff. I did not.
Yeah, he named off like 10 series. I was like, wow, he must be a real fan. I'm sorry.
One thing I have to touch on before we wrap up shop here is in regards to Mario Kart, the video game, favorite weapon to use against your opponent.
Man, first of all, I'm really bad at Mario Kart. Like, my niece beats me in Mario Kart. That's how bad I am. Heck, my ex-girlfriend used to beat me in that game, and she's terrible at video games. I guess my best at would be like, I don't know. Well, everyone knows like the star is pretty much unbeatable in the lightning bolt, but I like dropping off banana peels in front of the carts.
I've always been the weird one when it comes to that game because I like to use items that mostly a lot of people don't use. Like, I remember when I was in college and we would have Mario Kart Fest because, when you're in college, after you do everything else, you got to find something else to do with your time. So my favorite thing was to, like, drive in front of, like, one of my friends and drop like one of the fake item boxes right in front of them every time. Because no one, and I remember this as a joke, like no one falls for those fake item boxes. They don't.
Yeah.
But it's really, I don't know, it's satisfying to win a game of Mario Kart if you're playing against a bunch of people.
Yes.
And it makes no sense because, in the realm of video games sometimes, there shouldn't be that crazy satisfaction. But there is. If you look at it from the outside in, it seems crazy.
It's just the thrill of winning something, basically. It's like, I'm better than you. And yes, I also play a lot of video games, but Mario Kart is not one of my strengths.
That's not your strength.
No, it's not.
We'll get into some of the other ones on future podcasts, but
if you guys don't know, if you don't follow me on Twitter, so don't look past, by the way. But like, I talk about anime, video games, boy bands. So we basically covered a lot of those bases in this podcast.
I did. I think that's
you really did.
That has to. We came full circle, and before we head off to the finality with all this stuff, I have to say at the end, we got to give a shout out to a Kaiba Kart. So that's what they're called apparently in Japan. So for some reason, if someone lets them know that they got mentioned by us, more power to you. So again, we're going to wrap it up here on one of the fastest moving NBA podcasts on the web.
Yes,
clearly. So as I've always said it, go visit the website. We have daily content every day. Great stuff. Some of the stuff you won't even find on some other websites. So go in and definitely out. You can follow us on Twitter at @NBAPick. You can like us on Facebook. And specifically with this podcast, you can follow us. I believe it's under Moving Pick Pod on Twitter. Again, I could be wrong, but if you guys, we always fire off tweets occasionally that have that. So, just, if you guys, and again, if you guys ever want to comment on anything, feel free to. Yes. We will take your criticism. If I've learned anything, I take criticism really well. So,
we will take Twitter accounts, Facebook accounts, and phone numbers too.
Or at least I know Ray will. So at the end, we're going to close up shop here on the third episode of the Moving Pick Podcast. Before we go, you have any final thoughts, Ray?
Hi, Kristen.
More shout-outs for Kristen Lelo. Shout out to Kristen Lelo if she's listening. Hopefully she is. But, more power to her. Fantastic host for Inside Stuff along with Grant Hill.
So really good.
More power to her. One of the best in the biz. So, we got to give her credit. I'm going to give one more little nugget of thought from a songwriter, Merritt Larson. She has a song called Don't Save Me. So at the end of the, you don't need to save us. We'll just save you the hassle. We're here. We do what we do, and we enjoy what we do. So, all right, everyone, have a great week. Great rest of your week. And just for one quick note, there will be no episode next week, obviously, with Thanksgiving coming on. So, all of you have a very happy Thanksgiving and have a great holiday, you guys. Stay safe.
You want me to say something? I guess not.